Here's a comprehensive English language explanation, about 1,500 words, of Vice President JD Vance's remarks on NBC's Meet the Press, where he pushed back on host Kristen Welker's question regarding the GOP-led redistricting efforts, specifically characterizing them as a response to decades of Democratic power grabs. I've omitted numbering and extra spacing for clarity and flow. Vice President JD Vance appeared on NBC's flagship program Meet the Press on Sunday, August 24, 2025, where he was questioned by host Kristen Welker about recent Republican efforts to redraw congressional maps, including in Texas, in anticipation of the 2026 midterm elections. Welker asked a pointed question. If President Trump's agenda is as popular as the administration claims, why would the GOP feel compelled to redraw district boundaries to gain additional seats? Vance responded forcefully, framing the moves as a necessary corrective to years of aggressive Democratic gerrymandering. Welker's question rested on the premise that a popular political agenda would naturally translate into electoral gains under the existing maps. Vance rejected that premise, asserting that the playing field has long been tilted by Democratic map manipulation in numerous states over the past decade or two. He said, "Why have Democrats gerrymandered their states aggressively over the past 10 to 20 years?" And pointed to examples where the popular vote and representation have been starkly misaligned, such as in Massachusetts, where roughly 32% of voters backed Republican candidates, yet the state returned 0 Republicans to federal office. By repositioning Republican redistricting efforts as a balanced response rather than opportunistic maneuvers, Vance sought to cast the GOP strategy in a more principled light. He described the actions as an attempt to make the situation a little bit more fair on a national scale, arguing that Republicans are simply pushing back against what he characterized as a long-standing, one-sided advantage enjoyed by Democrats. This reframing portrays the GOP not as seeking advantage, but as restoring equity. These remarks came amid ongoing efforts by Texas Republicans to redraw congressional maps to favor their party ahead of the 2026 midterms. The new GOP-leaning maps cleared the state legislature and await the governor's signature. Vance emphasized that this is not about raw political gain but rather correcting a skewed system. He also invoked the memory of the 2018 midterms, when Republicans lost 40 House seats and were 24 seats down, to underscore the difficulty of overcoming district disadvantages even when their policies are relatively popular. He pointed to Trump's ambition of achieving a 100-seat House majority as evidence of the stakes at play. On the other hand, Democratic leaders have signaled they're prepared to counter such tactics aggressively. California Governor Gavin Newsom has already signed legislation enabling a special election on November 4 that would dismantle the state's independent redistricting commission and replace it with a map drawn by the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, clearly intended as a countermove to Republican redistricting in states like Texas. Vance further declared that state-level Democratic gerrymandering has reached its logical maximum. "There's just not a whole lot of juice left out of that lemon," he said, suggesting that Democrats have already exploited the strategy as much as they could. Thus, Republicans are now justified in deploying similarly assertive tactics on their side. Taken together, Vance's argument hinges on a few central claims. First, that Democratic gerrymandering over the previous 10 to 20 years created structural disadvantages for Republican candidates. Second, that Republican redistricting efforts are not radical innovations, but rather necessary responses to restore fairness. Third, that the political inferiority of Republican candidates under prior maps cannot simply be averted by popular policy messaging alone, that systematic imbalances must be addressed. Finally, that Democrats are already fighting back through their own redistricting initiatives, signaling that the map wars are intensifying heading into 2026. Critics, particularly among Democratic voices, are likely to view this as a blatant political power grab, regardless of its parody justification. Indeed, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries seized the moment to point to past Democratic redistricting victories as well. He argued that Democrats earned 40 House seats in 2018 and cautioned that the GOP efforts could prompt a backlash or fuel Democratic mobilization. The broader context is that mid-decade redistricting, rather than the usual post-census, every 10 years map redrawing, is unusual and contentious. It typically faces heightened scrutiny because it breaks from the norm and can be viewed as opportunistic. However, Vance is embracing that unconventional move as a direct response to what he sees as an already imbalanced system. From a political strategy standpoint, Vance's messaging is carefully calibrated. He anticipates Democratic criticism by preemptively framing the GOP's actions not as raw partisanship, but defensive and corrective. By citing states like Massachusetts and highlighting the disconnect between voter preference and representation, he undercuts the inevitability that fair representation happens naturally under current systems. He also tries to appeal to a broader fairness narrative, something that resonates with voters across the spectrum, by suggesting that the rules of representation must protect proportional reflection of voter preferences. For policymakers, this amounts to a renewed push for partisan redistricting once considered undemocratic, but now recast as fair game in a highly polarized landscape where both sides wield the tool. In response, Democratic leaders like Gavin Newsom are accelerating their own map-making moves, opening a new front in the gerrymandering arms race. Both parties appear positioned to reshape electoral outcomes through strategic redistricting. In conclusion, Vice President JD Vance used his appearance on Meet the Press to offer a robust defense of Republican-led redistricting ahead of the 2026 midterms. He framed these measures as necessary correctives to long-standing Democratic gerrymandering, arguing that they are not aggressive grabs for advantage, but rather steps toward restoring fairness. He dismissed the idea that Republican policies alone could realign representation, and positioned redistricting as the only viable path forward given entrenched map manipulation. Meanwhile, Democratic responses, including legal and legislative countermoves in states like California, signal that the political remapping of America is still accelerating.